المهدي المهدي غالي غالي ناصر ناصر للثروات المهدي المهدي زائر زائر شارد شارد سيف الثار المهدي المهدي فجر فجر للأحرار المهدي المهدي أمل أمل يطلق في الدنيا غيران المهدي المهدي يصنع.
Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to the second show. We are discussing this week again the Mahdi and messianic figures in Islam and other religions. Today on the show again we have Sayyid Ali Abbas Rizvi. Sayyid, today we're discussing the messianic figure in various faith traditions, and we're going to examine the major faith traditions, and I think it'll be sensible if we start at the eldest one. Let's start off with Taoism.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Taoism, I think, probably being the oldest of religions, again, in the same way as all other religions have this kind of transcendental understanding of a savior, of a Mahdi. I think before we go deep inside to exactly what they believe in or summarize what the concept of the Mahdi is, I think it's important to understand a couple of points, and that is that humanity, civilizations, from very beginnings have been talking about the idea that there will be a figure or personality who will come at the end of time, or at least after a cycle, whereby he will emancipate a nation or the nations from, for example, oppression. So to give an example, you find Moses, the coming of Moses for the Israelites at a time where the Pharaoh had really squashed them, taken them to the lowest kind of possible existence, and then they were wishing or waiting for a figure to come who would come and emancipate them, free them from the shackles of slavery. So the idea is something which is found in all human beings. Now the question that people ask is this psychological? Is it the fact that whenever a person or a group of people are going through pain and suffering, then they feel or they believe that there's going to be some form of a relief, and that's the relief that takes them to hope away from despair? The answer, the multiple answers, is that if it's found in all human beings, that is something which is primordial. If each one of us hopes or has a desire that after difficulty there is relief, as it says in the Quran, therefore that is something which is primordial, and therefore that's something which is being created by God. God does not put a nature or a characteristic in us which is a lie. That would then be kind of deceiving or deception. So if each one of us, all of humanity, has this understanding that with difficulty, if we were to persevere long enough, there would be some form of a relief, as we say in the Quran, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, then the idea is that it is a reality. So therefore, if all of humanity feel that eventually there will be a savior, then by default, without looking at any world religion, there is an understanding that there will eventually be relief from the sufferings that we have. What type of sufferings do we have? Right? So we could have social sufferings. Emotionally we're suffering. Let's say in terms of the heart, physical suffering. So just there we have different types of sufferings that we could be kind of subjected to. The big type of suffering that we have within the world, the majority of us, is the suffering of the heart. Separation, pain. And we believe, as all of us do, either it kills you or it makes you stronger. And if you don't die, you'll be stronger. Saying that most of us have heard, and we use this saying most of the time. So the idea then is that from pain, from suffering, from torture, there's a form of a relief. In this way, when you look at Taoism, whether or not it's a divine religion is not our discussion. We will not negate it and say that it's not a divine religion because we don't have enough information on it. So the idea is that, for example, when it comes to Hinduism, the fact that we say that Hindus are polytheists, and so therefore, or non-believers, let's say, are polytheists, and so therefore their criteria or the way that we should deal with them is different in terms of fiqh may differ. Fiqh is based on certainty. It's more than possible that Hindus may be people of the book. But within fiqh, because the laws are based upon certainty, for For example, the parameters of Ahlul Kitab. Are Ahlul Kitab najis or not? Prior to Ayatollah Muhsin al-Hakim, the view was that Ahlul Kitab are najis. After that, it changes. So sometimes fiqh is evolving based upon certainty, based upon new evidences which may come forward. To give you another example, when it comes to, let's say, the sighting of the moon issue, all of the Maraji, let's say at the moment, or the majority of the Maraji believe in the unity of the horizons. The only one who differs is Ayatollah Sistani. So again, there's a difference that may come. Laws may change, proofs may come, evidences. So whether Hindus, Taoists, Buddhists, Eastern religions are Ahlul Kitab, we don't have enough information because our scholars have been centralized within those places where there were pre-existing Christians or Jews. To give an example, Zoroastrians and Sabaean. Ayatollah Mirza Ali al-Gharawi wrote a number of volumes proving the fact that Zoroastrians and Sabaean were Ahlul Kitab. Prior to that, the famous rulings were that they were not part of the Ahlul Kitab. Research developed, later on they were proved. So we can't at this moment in time basically affirm or reject either. To reject it would again be, because when you go into the essential nature of all religions, major religions, you see Tawheed and you see unity in that. It's a very kind of like a perennialist view.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm not a perennialist.
Okay,
I don't
thank
claim
you
to be
for
a perennialist.
confirming that.
Yeah, I'm confirming that there is plurality because
Yeah.
God is multiple. But at the same time, in the deen and Allah al-Islam. For
Yeah.
Allah, the deen is Islam.
Absolutely.
Nevertheless,
There is a, other religions do not have the monotheism that is required necessarily.
yeah. If Islam is a
Be a true
pathway,
answer.
Islam has the
Yeah.
most perfect.
Yeah.
Not negating, again, the Quran doesn't negate. We're not negating other religions. They had a time and a place. They had a form of a development. Islam is the most perfect of that.
Absolutely.
So anyhow, coming back, right, what does Taoism say? And the interesting thing is, if you look at all world religions, and here I'll first add the conclusion, then we can start. Basically, the conclusion is that all world religions believe in the same kind of personality. The idea is, we say in logic, the debate is never ever look at something based just upon its name. Look at the characteristics. Give you an example. In this glass is water. In English, we call it water. If you go to another part of the world, they'll call it ma. Go to another part of the world, they'll call it ab. Same thing, different names, is the characteristic.
Yeah.
Mahdi means the one who is guided. Hadi is the one who guides, teaches, guides. Mahdi is the one who's guided. In the same way, if you look at the characteristics of that awaited savior, you find that there are two things which come into light, what the Taoists have mentioned. Taoists also mention that to the end of time, when the cycle is finished, that universal cycle, and this manifestation of Li Hong comes, the purpose of this individual will be to emancipate a nation from suffering and to take that nation towards its perfection. If you look at the same definition within Islam, emancipation from suffering means what? Today, suffering, when we look at it on a religious level, our mind goes towards Buddhism, the idea of removing negative suffering. But essentially, what is negative suffering? Wars, tragedies. To achieve the equilibrium. When you're at a state of equilibrium, you cease to suffer. If the completion of the cycle and the coming or the manifestation of Li Hong is going to happen, then what happens afterwards in the world is an equilibrium, so that all types of suffering cease to exist: social, emotional, physical. In that way, if you look at the purpose of our Imam, when we talk about implementing justice, and that's his aim, to implement justice, what is justice? Justice, by definition, go back to Aristotle, from all virtue, justice is the mother virtue, because justice gels all of the other virtues, putting a thing in its rightful place. Rightfully, we should be in a state of equilibrium. So, in terms of the definition given in Taoism, the idea of an awaited savior to take the world and remove it from negative suffering fits the fact that there may be the coming, or it may be implying our Imam as well. You see, the term is abstract, but the definitions that are given fit the definition of the person who we are awaiting as well.
Is there what's the physical manifestation of the Messiah in Taoism? Is there a person's going to come?
A person who is a divine manifestation. So you see, within the Eastern traditions, you find there's a usage of the word incarnation, reincarnation. There are 4 types of reincarnations. One of them Islam rejects. Doesn't necessarily mean that the idea is what is reincarnation. The one that we reject is the idea that man turns, let's say for example, into an animal. There's a movement which takes place where the body then, he embodies divinity. That type of reincarnation is not accepted within us. For example, if we believed in the cycle of reincarnation like in Hinduism, that we were to be transformed into an animal, that destroys our perfection. We have not been created to go into decline. We've been created to go vertically even towards God again. So the manifestation of this person is a person who is divine. He will be a manifestation of the divine. Does that stem outside of the realm? So to give you another example, when let's say the Eastern religions talk about reincarnation, see the definition, the way that it's come to us, we lack understanding as to what they're saying. The reason why we lack understanding is some of the philosophies which were used for an elite class. For example, Hinduism. There's a caste within the Brahmins, the 4 castes. The highest caste is the Brahmin caste. They're believers in a formless, shapeless God, a God which is transcendental. Look at the Hare Krishnas. They believe in a form God, in the form of Krishna, but they believe in one God as well. Lower down you get, then it becomes multiple.
Yeah.
So it's the idea of understanding. So when we talk about reincarnation, the fact is that it's not reincarnation, it's not tajassum, it's not the fact that it takes a bodily form. Our problem, not the problem, but our intellectual argument against Christians, we believe in Jesus as the manifestation of God, not as the embodiment of God. They've taken that idea that to have a body, mujassima, they've taken that idea. We've taken the idea that it's a tajalli manifestation, 2 different things.
Yeah.
So in the same way, when we talk about the manifestation of divinity, what are you essentially talking about? You are talking about the perfect man. Because the perfect man is the encompassing of the entire universe. See, the 12th Imam, when the Imam comes, he is the reflection of the Prophet of God. So he is the manifestation of the Prophet of God, which means that the perfect man is a complete universe walking. When the Imam walks, it is the entire reality of the universe walking in him. All of creation, when brought to one microcosmic level, is the perfect man. So the 12th Imam is the perfection from the lowest level of existence, which is the mineral level, to the highest level of existence, which is the angelic realm. He's basically a walking, talking universe. That's what the perfect man is. And hence, he is a manifestation of divinity. Why? Because he represents the manifestation of the attributes of action of God, af'al of Allah, characteristics. He's a manifestation of that. So when he walks, it's as if the entire universe is walking.
This is a side question, Sayed, but why do human beings need to pass through this time period between the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Imam Mahdi coming back? Why does it need to be a gap of the period of the 12 Imams? Why couldn't the Prophet have led humanity into this period of perfection? Why did there need to be that time?
For the same reason why there's 124,000 prophets. For the same reason why after Judaism came Christianity. The idea is that the humans were not ready. In the time of the Prophet, they weren't the most perfect of people. And maybe some people may feel, kind of reservation if I say this. But the fact is that the time of the Prophet, the people were not as ready and they weren't as committed as the followers of the Mahdi will be. And you find it in tradition. So the companions of the Prophet were not the most perfect of creation.
It's quite interesting you say that, because many Muslims, not so much in the Shia tradition, had this understanding that the Sahaba, because they were closer to the Prophet, they had a better faith than people 1,400 years later, or perhaps in the future when the Mahdi comes.
See, I know that I raised a controversial point, but the idea is that the likes of Surah Munafiqun would not have been revealed if they were the most perfect in that respect. It's not the case. The Prophet of God is sitting there both now. This is now going back to Sunni tradition as well as Shia traditions. The Prophet is sitting there. He sends salutations. The companions say, who are you sending your salutations on? So I'm sending them to my brothers. But are we not your brothers? No, you're my companions, my brothers. Who are your brothers? Akhir Zaman, those people who have not seen me and still profess faith. Sayyid al-Shuhada, standing in Karbala, all Muslims, documented history. It says that the companions which I have, my father didn't have them, my brother didn't have them, my grandfather didn't have them. 72 people who are willing to die for him. Look at the Battle of Uhud. Bar 10 or 12, everybody'd run away. Look at when Surah Jum'ah is revealed. Look at the last verse of Surah Jum'ah. They leave you. They go towards what? For amusements, for tijarat, for trading. That tells us that even towards the end of the life of the Prophet, that level of commitment wasn't there. See, the coming of the Imam is a development of human civilization, of the universe developing to its final mean point. Universe hadn't developed then. Yes, the people in those days were probably the most advanced, hence the final prophet came, because they had the right facility or they had cultivated the right situation for the prophet to come. But the fact is that afterwards there's a chain of guidance. When the 12th Imam comes, he will fill the world with justice. That means the world needs to be receptive. We don't believe in this kind of like the idea of this Armageddon. The entire world needs to be destroyed for the Imam to come. No. Sometimes it's even contradictory that we say that the world will all be destroyed. Then what's going to happen? The Imam's going to redevelop the world in 7 years? 70 years? No, it's not from destruction. We're building on it. The final prophet, when he came, Moses had come with his Sharia, Jesus had come with the spirit of the law, Abraham had come with monotheism and chivalry. The prophet polished in the same way the Imam polishes the message. So the purpose, when the Imam does come, look at the tradition, you find his companions are second to none. They are like mountains of iron, basically. They can't shake. And then, you can't overcome them. One of them has a spiritual strength of 10 other guys. See, the tradition of the companions of the Imam is something which is phenomenal. So we need to build ourselves as a community, and then hence coming back to the tradition. If 40 good people are present, Imam will come. In the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the tradition is found within Tabari. Tabari is a history source book for our brothers in the other sect or other sects. In that, Abu Sufyan comes to the Imam and says, your khilafat, your caliphate has been taken from you. I can fill out Medina with an army. Let's fight the first Khalifa. And Amir al-Mu'mineen turns around and says, Abu Sufyan, when have you become a friend of Islam? And many people stop right there. And they all argue, well, look, if Ali wanted the Khilafah, he would have fought for it. And so therefore he didn't fight for it, so they didn't want it. No, read on. But if there were 40 good people, then I would have stood up and I would have fought for my right. So the idea is 40 people. So after the death of the Prophet, are we saying that there were not 40 people who were... See, one thing is being good. One thing is being individually good. Our parents' generation may be very good, but the fact is their failures in one way is that as a collective unit, they fail to call the Imam back. So when we look at good, or people who are good, doesn't mean that if you're not good, you're bad. No, it's about the readiness and how prepared you are, spiritually prepared you are. In the time of the Prophet, there were many people who are very good. Were they spiritually prepared though? It's like Amir al-Mu'mineen says to Kumail, one of his closest companions, Kumail, I want to tell you, but I know you're not going to understand. And Kumail insists, and he says, fine, I'll tell you, even though I know you're not going to understand. Why? See, there were companions even in the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, alayhi salam, who were close to him. We regard them as high companions. They're probably 20 times worth more than what we're worth. But the fact of the matter is that when they were not ready spiritually, then that's why you could say that the Mahdi hasn't come. This army of the 12th Imam will be spiritually ready. There will be a connection. They will have reached those levels where most human beings cannot reach. And so that's why the Imam doesn't come. that we need that grounds, absolute grounds, that when it's firm and prepared and there are people there to receive him. You go, for example, when a head of state goes to another country, months of work. Let's say, for example, a president was to come to the United Kingdom. Let's say, for example, the American president was to come here. Months in advance, security set up, red carpet is rolled out, the right type of food, shouldn't be too spicy, should be the right amount of caviar. Let's get that 1895 bottle of champagne out, etc., etc., etc. Then when all of that is the mean point, then you. In the same way, if that same president was to come, there was no security, there's no nothing, there's no welcoming party, that would be an insult to their country. In the very same way, when the Imam is coming, there needs to be that right atmosphere for him to then come to remold. So that means that there are good people, and there will be good people. The idea of doom and gloom and destruction and everything's going to be destroyed and, we're going to have stones and sticks. No, that's not the idea. This is why every Thursday you recite Dua Kumail. It's a great big philosophy behind that. Why recite Dua Nutbah? The idea is that we are awaiting the Imam to come at any stage. Purpose of the Imam? To fill the world with peace, love, justice. Mean point. Not wars, famine, destruction. That's a wrong interpretation. That's a very Christian interpretation that we've taken on board. The apocalypse, the Armageddon, doesn't need to happen. We don't need destruction. We could very easily prepare ourselves. Then he can come forward and he can fill the world with peace and justice.
Inshallah. Okay, so let's move on to Christianity now, Sayed. Who is the messianic figure in Christianity, and what will be their physical manifestation and the signs when they arrive to a Christian?
Christianity is very simple in that respect. Christians are waiting for the second coming of Jesus. In the same way in Islam, we're also waiting for the second coming of Jesus. So we don't have any kind of... You see, the thing is that as the religions go down, you will then see that it becomes more specific from a universal level. So with the Christians or Christianity, we are awaiting or approaching the second coming of Jesus, and he will come with the 12th Imam. So, but if you go in, let's say, for example, we go in order, what we will then see is that it develops and becomes thicker. So, for example, something like Hinduism, what you find is that within their tradition is that the Avatar who is going to come, the Avatar, Sorry, I laughed.
Sorry, I realised I've gone from 1 to number 5. I've misread that. It's actually Hinduism next. But you were talking about Christianity and...
Let's take it again.
Should we just go to Hinduism now?
Yeah. I'll just carry on where I started.
Let's start Hinduism. Yep.
So just to focus on that point, that if we were to go in order and we come to, let's say, Hinduism, we find that, again, this is like a cycle. It's like a cyclical chain of events. Again, they believe in cycles, completion of cycles. This dawra, this idea of inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So this coming of this Avatar, the end of Kali Yoga, the idea that this Maya which is in the world, this materialism, this false kind of materialism, superficial nature which needs to be destroyed to get to God, a person will come as this Avatar, as this 12th or 10th cycle. And the idea is that, again, as the 12th, we call him the 12th Imam. And again, his idea is he's the manifestation, again, of the divine. Again, the same terminology is used. And he will, again, bring peace, remove suffering. So the idea of peace and removing suffering, it's a universal concept. And again, it's this awaitedness, this readied preparation that when times are bad, a savior will come and save us. So again, you find these concepts within Hinduism. In the same way, if you go into maybe other religions, you'll also find, for example, if you were Zoroastrian or if you look at the other faiths, the idea is that a person or a savior will come to remove suffering as a manifestation of the divine, as a person who has divine characteristics, a person who will take man to peace and essentially take man back to God.
Okay, let's move on now to the monotheistic religions, Abrahamic traditions. The eldest one, shall we look at Judaism first? And who is the messianic figure in Judaism? What will be their signs and...
Judaism is quite an interesting religion, actually. It's very interesting, and it explains a lot of, it goes into a lot of depth, the philosophy of it, explains a lot of question marks that many people may have. Messianism within Judaism is broken into 3 types. It's quite interesting, actually, if one reads into it. Going back to what we said at the very beginning, said that this idea of savior, the first level of Messianism within Judaism is the idea that whenever the Jewish nation is in problem, or wherever they've fallen into kind of issues, enslaved, being abused, that a savior will come. Maybe every generation, every 100 years, every 200 years. The idea is that when that savior comes, he will save that nation or the nation from kind of the shackles of imprisonment and slavery, Moses being one of them. Jesus, again, was why many Jews converted was because they believed in him as the Messiah, and he was a Messiah figure. So the concept of Messianism or Mahdiism on the first level within Judaism is the idea that there will be a person who every generation, whether it's King David or Solomon, that there will be a prophet or somebody like a prophet who will come, who will save that nation. And even today, you find that many of our Jewish brothers, they talk about a savior figure, a Messiah who may come. You know, some of them have argued that certain events which are taking place in the world are pointing towards, for example, within Syria, are pointing towards the coming of a Messiah even within Judaism. So, and of course, the Jews are waiting for Jesus, essentially, because as far as the Christians are concerned, they rejected the Jesus that they felt was a Jesus. So in this way, the first level of Messianism within Christianity, within Judaism, is the idea that every generation a person comes and saves them. Second and third now become even more interesting. Second type of concept within Judaism of a messianic figure or Messianism is a system. The idea is that just as we have Dajjal, and we talk about a system of Dajjal, they too have a system in place where they look at the system of the messianic system. What is that? And when we look at Messianism within Islam, can we look at the Mahdi being a concept as well? Not just a person? Well, the concept or the system itself of Mahdiism also exists, because the world has to be at a mean point to receive the Mahdi, which means that there's a system in place. There is a system of the Mahdi as well. And Judaism emphasizes this. It says, look, when the world has reached its perfection, when the Jews have tried their best and they facilitated for the coming. For example, you look at why is there such a divide at the moment among certain Jews of whether or not a particular country should be there or not. So the idea is because they're waiting for the facilitating of the Mahdi. Is it allowed before the coming of the Messiah for there to be a state, a Jewish state, or is it not allowed? Again, just as we have before the coming of the 12th Imam, is it allowed to have an Islamic state or not? Many fuqaha say that is batil, it's not accepted to have a state before the coming of the Imam. In the same way, there are certain Jews who will say that it's not accepted to have a state, just as we can't have an Islamic state, for them to have a Jewish state before the coming of the Messiah. So there are arguments like this which are there, but at the same time you find that they're facilitating, and in the same way we should also be facilitating. So the idea then is that the second category of Messianism is that you prepare a system, a global system in place, which then works towards the coming of this figure, or at least you have a utopia in place. The system of the Mahdi really is a utopia. The system of Messianism is a utopia. Third point when it comes to the idea that within Judaism is the figure of a Messiah. So you see 3 levels. First is Savior, which comes a generation every 100 years or so. And it's long been overdue now within Judaism. Second level is the system. Third level is a person who will come for the end of time.
Okay, thank you, Syed. That's an interesting point about the Islamic State you brought there. The fact that some scholars consider Islamic State in the current world, before the coming of the Imam, it doesn't have any legitimacy. Can you explore that more?
It's topical, it's very controversial. You see, there's two schools of thought. In fact, there are more schools of thought now. Traditionally, there were two schools of thought. One thought was that the creation of an Islamic state in the occultation of the Imam is not wajib. For example, Ayatollah Gul-Paygani. Ayatollah Gul-Paygani believed that it wasn't wajib to create an Islamic state, but now that one has been created in the form of Iran, and he lived in Qom, so now to help it is wajib. The other idea, or other fuqaha, I'm not going to mention any names now, I don't want to get too controversial, but the fact was that there were certain fuqaha who believed that there shouldn't be a state, full stop. Then there were fuqaha, such as Imam Khomeini and the likes, who believe no, just because the Imam isn't here doesn't mean the work should stop. The argument then that develops from there is that should there be an Islamic state, or should the fuqaha help in implementing law? Go back, Iran's history, in the time of the Safavis. There's a king in place, but there were ulama who were helping the judicial process. Because we say within Islam that corporal punishment, or in fact, generally when it comes to judgments, cannot be given by a layman, but it needs to a jurist in place to be able to give law, to give edicts out, verdicts. So in this way you found that even in the time of the Safavis, in the time of the Khajas, that you had people who were there, ulama, who would help the institution and the government, so they were helping in basically implementing law. So some believe that it was only up to that level. Others believe no. The faqih in the time of Ghaybat al-Kubra, in the time of the occultation, has all of the power, mutlaqa, of the Imam, the wilayat of the Imam, to implement laws. Obviously they don't have wilayat al-Taqwini like the Imam does, but no, they have all the other powers, mutlaqa in this sense, meaning all the social responsibilities of the Imam, which means appointing the prayer leader for Jum'ah, which could also mean protection, which could also mean property. So the division here then stemmed out to was that Ayatollah Khoy, for example, believed that there were certain parameters which the wilaya of the faqih was restricted. So there's no argument here that the faqih has a wilaya, full stop. For example, orphans, widowers, majhul al-mal, that property that doesn't have an owner, or the owner is not known. All of these things you'll find that the faqih has power over. Imam Khomeini's idea, or his reasoning, was that in the time of the occultation, in fact, it's consistent to everything. Everything is encompassed. So for Ayatollah Khoy, there was no way of him saying, for example, you can take a country from the Shah because it's beyond our jurisdiction, regardless of the fact that he may not be just. Well, Khoy said no. If I am a faqih and I have the power of the faqih, I have the power of the Imam, therefore I can take property away from whoever I want. And he took Iran away from the Shah. So as you can see, there's a development process. There are opinions within Islam. So, and it's an intellectual debate. I think a lot of people, what they do is they become very emotional and they start fighting and all sorts of issues. No, this debate amongst the fuqaha is an intellectual debate. There are various arguments, one side and the other side. Is for the average person, it's better for you to stay out of the intellectual debate, because obviously the average person does not know the various proofs and the reasoning, the istidlal aqli and naqli to it. So really, I've laid out some ideas, some opinions that there are there, but nevertheless, all the fuqaha will tell you is that to go against, once an Islamic state is formed, to go against an Islamic state is haram then.
Thank you, Syed. Let's compare this idea of an Islamic state to the Jewish idea of utopia. Is it in Judaism, they have a similar understanding that a Jewish state with Jewish law will be created, according to some scholars? And if we compare that to Islam, for both religions, is it necessary that this model, this structure, is created in a way that it could be applied globally? And is it expected that this state should be spread globally?
I think there's a number of questions there. The system of the Imam and the government of the Imam, or the government of the Messiah, is different from man-made governments. Man-made governments will always have their limitations. They're not perfect states. Within Judaism, the predominant idea 200 years ago, 150 years ago, was the idea that, in fact, throughout history has been the idea that until the Messiah, there's no Jewish state. Theodor Herzl came along, and then you had the development of the idea of the Jewish state. But before, Jewish thinkers did not believe, essentially, in the idea of a state. The differing opinions to that. The idea is that today there is no Jewish state as such either, based upon Talmud or Talmudic law, or even based upon again, Talmud is 1500 years old, but there's no system at the moment which is based purely on Jewish law. In the same way as, I don't know, 52 countries in the Islamic world, maybe 50 of them are not based on Islamic law, full stop. You don't find a perfect state at this moment in the same way as we envisage the state of the utopia. So utopia cannot be achieved. Utopia is a concept which only the Messiah within Judaism, or we call it the Mahdi within Islam, can be achieved. But in the same way as now that there is a state, so the Jews have a state. Now there may be many who may not agree with it, there may be many who may agree with it. It's a secular system, secular state. In the same way, if you come to Islam, which Islamic state do you take as right?
Absolutely. So how can they define themselves or claim to be an Islamic state?
Well, I don't think they can. If I don't want to start mentioning 50 countries or whatever, but the fact of the matter is that there is no kingship, within the Islamic states, and etc., etc., etc. So, without touching political grounds, again, we're not a political show, and it's more of a academic discussion. The idea is that we, in trying to create a groundwork for the coming of the Imam, are obviously then trying to create the right atmosphere. That's what the idea is. If the Jewish state, now we're talking hypothetically, I'm not pointing to any country, if a Jewish state is facilitating for that, it's achieving its results. If an Islamic state is facilitating for that, it's achieving its results. If it's in detriment, or if the name is just there as a religious name, but the work in there's non-religious, then it's tarnishing the name of religion. Thus, I think that, at least in Islamic terms, there is a necessity to implement law. Obviously there is. But at the same time, the model needs to be a correct one. Let's say have a king and his son. That's a kingship. That's not Islam, for example. So I think that the term Islamic state, where there's monarchies, there's absolute rule, these kind of things, that not be worthwhile. Or if people are being bought over, or for example, an army, the idea is that there needs to be set laws. And if you are going to establish it, we can only hypothetically look at it. That's the thing. So let's say, for example, if you come to Islam, the likes of Shaheed al-Sadr, the likes of Imam Khomeini and other people, the way that they envisaged it, if I take it to a very philosophical idea, they envisage, or let's say Imam Khomeini was a philosopher, so let's look at him in the philosophical light. How would you look at it? Many Western academics have said the model that he developed was one which was looking at the philosopher king that Plato talks about. The idea of an enlightened being who, both in terms of the worldly and the spiritual aspects, are in union, to be able to run a system in theory like that. Or if you look at it in terms of jurisprudence, a person who's well versed within jurisprudence to be able to implement the laws, because as we said, only a jurist can. Or to look at it on an irfani level, a person who can take a nation to spiritual enlightenment. That's not going to happen to the definition. Only the 12th Imam can do that. Nobody else has the potential. If that was the case, then we wouldn't be here 1100 years later after the occultation of the Imam. So again, there is no clear-cut answer. What we have today is probably the best that we have today. Much development, though, is needed. And when we talk Islam as abstract, so we have to take into consideration all the systems within Islam present. majority of those systems, in fact nearly all of them, 99% of those systems, are failures today. They're not an Islamic system. So unfortunately we don't have that. But what we can do, for example, if you go into the Islamic world, you look at those numbers of states that we have. Are they working? No, they're not. A refinement is needed. In fact, we need a refinement. We need a refinement system generally in the world. But again, we'll leave that to the academics to have a look at.
Yep. Thank you, Sid. It sounds like a good chance to end the show. We've spoken about how our progression in terms of politically, spiritually, we have some way to go till, inshallah, the Mahdi comes back. Thank you very much, Sayyid. Assalamu alaikum to viewers.
به یاسین به معراج احمد به قدر و به کوثر به رضوان و طوبی به وحی الهی به قرآن جاری به تورات موسی و انجیل عیسی بسی پادشاهی کنم در گدایی چو باشم گدای گدایان زهرا چه شبها که زهرا دعا کرده تا ما همه شیعه گردیم و بیتاب مولا غلامی این خانواده دلیل و مراد خدا بوده از خلقت ما مسیرت مشخص امیرت مشخص مکن دل ای دل بزن دل به دریا که دنیا به خسران عقبا نیرزد به دوریز اولاد زهرا نیرزد و این زندگانی فانی جوانی خوشیهای امروز و اینجا به افسوس بسیار فردا نیرزد اگر عاشقانه هوادار یاری اگر مخلصانه گرفتار یاری اگر آبرو می‌گذاری به پایش یقیناً خریدار یاری بگو چند جمعه گذشتی ز خوابت چه اندازه در ندبه ها زاریاری به شانه کشیدی غم سینه اش را و یا چون بقیه تو سربار یاری اگر یک نفر را به او وصل کردی برای سپاهش تو سردار یاری به گریه شبی را سحر کردی یا نه چه مقدار بیتاب و بیمار یاری دل آشفته بودن دلیل کمی نیست اگر بیقراری بدان یار یاری و پایان این بیقراری بهشت است بهشتی که سرخوش ز دیدار یاری نسیم کرامت وزیدن گرفته و باران رحمت چکیدن گرفته مبادا بدوزی نگاه دلت را به مردم که بازار یوسف فروشی در این دوره بد شدیدن گرفته خدایا به روی درخشان مهدی به زلف سیاه و پریشان مهدی به قلب رؤوفش که دریای داغ است به چشمان از غصه گریان مهدی به لبهای گرم علی یا علیش به ذکر حسین و حسن جان مهدی به دست کریم و نگاه رحیمش به چشم امید فقیران مهدی به حال نیاز و قنوت نمازش به سبحان 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 مهدی به برق نگاه و به خال سیاهش به عطر ملیح گریبان مهدی به حج جمیلش به جاه جلیلش به صوت حجازی قرآن مهدی به صبح عراق و شبانگاه شامش به آهنگ سمت خراسان مهدی به جان داده های مسیر عبورش به شهد شهود شهیدان مهدی مرا دائم الاشتیاقش بگردان، مرا سینه چاک فراقش بگردان. تفضل بفرما بر این بنده بی سر و پا، مرا همدم و محرم و همرکابه سفرهای سوی خراسان و شام و عراقش بگردان. یا مهدی یا مهدی مددی